to another edition of Crush Your Mountain Wellness. Got to ask you a question. Are you dealing with brain fog? Are you dealing with lack of focus? In fact, are you dealing with forgetting things? Are you having senior moments? Okay. Well, guess what? You know, we're in a season called Mental Health Month, where they're focusing on all sorts of mental wellness. And I have with me today an expert that's going to help us to get focused, to build ourselves, even in terms of how our food intake affects our mind and our thinking. Let me tell you about this gorgeous young lady. This is Dr. Leilani Sáez. She's a brain wellness coach, and she is the owner of Natural Capacities, who helps adults work with their brains instead of against their brains. She specializes in supporting clients who are overwhelmed by brain fog, focus, or forgetting problems so that they can feel, do, and think better. Drawing from brain and cognitive research, positive psychology, and mindfulness, Dr. Leilani offers guidance for transforming brain glitchy doubts into knowledge. Her resilient framework offers a systematic, and resilient is a technique or a modality of hers, and it offers a systemic approach to cultivated insight. Okay, it enhances personal awareness, and she helps you to adopt everyday practices and new habits of mind for improved cognition and life navigation. And we all need to navigate through life. Clients become clear, strong, and ready to respond to life's challenges using focused energy, self-mastery, stress-resistant control. And she sounds like a sensei in one of those kung fu remote type of things. And we're going to learn from her. So we'll sit at the feet of this masterful teacher, Dr. Leilani Sáez. Welcome to Crush Your Mountain Wellness.
Thank you. What a wonderful introduction.
Well,
glad to be here.
You are a wonderful person. We're glad to have you with us. So tell us a little bit about the idea of dealing with individuals with brain fog. That's a big issue because, well, you know, what are the causes, first of all, of brain fog?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tend to simplify it for people, because there are many reasons why people get brain fog. I tend to divide it into 3 buckets. You can have chronic conditions, chronic health conditions, such as diabetes, fibromyalgia, lupus. So you have chronic conditions and their treatments. You can also have hormones. And then you also have kind of lifestyle factors in the way that people are living, including high stress. And so those are kind of 3 different camps that require different kinds of interventions, so to speak. Yeah.
That's interesting. So you mentioned things like lupus and other illnesses.
Yeah.
Does diet have anything to do with our capacity to function cognitively? On our,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things that really becomes clear for those folks who are having chronic issues is that with brain fog, it's a sign that there's overwhelming inflammation happening in the body. It's overwhelming your cognitive functioning. So it doesn't have to be inflammation in the brain. It can be elsewhere in the body, but it's disrupting the signaling that we need to think and to process. And so the way that we eat can actually help us to reduce inflammation. So then we can start to think more clearly and function better across our different senses and organs and such. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that, because a lot of my guests, well, not guests, but a lot of my guests have mentioned information before, but my viewers may not be entirely clear on what we mean by inflammation and then how it affects their day-to-day life. You know, we think about inflammation, we might think about maybe a swelling on the arm or something like that. You know, you got a toothache, or God forbid you bump your head and you get inflammation here or what have you. But please inform our guests, our viewers, in terms of what inflammation is in this case, because it's very important that people understand that.
Yeah, well, so we have byproducts that our body produces. We can get inflammation from things like food sensitivities. So if we eat, for example, that is irritating to our stomach lining, it's going to create inflammation. Even if we don't have gastrointestinal problems, we can still have this kind of hidden inflammation that's happening. And so when we have these kinds of things, they're kind of hidden, right? Sometimes we see inflammation for some people who have, say, for example, psoriasis. They can tell when they've taken in something that is irritating to their system because their skin will react, right? But not all conditions can you tell. And so, for example, I know folks who have diabetes. They know when they've had brain fog because suddenly, or when something's off with their blood sugar. It's not something you all can measure it. It can be measured, of course, but to look at someone who has diabetes, you might not know, but they know inside because suddenly the room doesn't feel quite the same. They might feel off balance. They might feel slower in their thinking. Their whole ability to think and to function suddenly changes. And so when inflammation happens, it can sometimes be a hidden source, but it's the body's way of signaling to us that something's not right, that there's been an irritant. And so it's a complicated process of kind of how the cells respond and react. But the big idea is that it's not too different from how you just described by a cut, right? Except that there's things that are happening inside. So, for example, one easy way to think about inflammation in the gut is that over time, if you keep irritating your stomach lining, the fibers that are kind of supposed to keep a boundary, between your gut, they become looser and almost then they create these gaps. And then you start to run into problems because food starts getting in places, not metabolizing correctly. And so now you're creating this perpetual, almost fire condition. And that's one way I describe to people who have had brain fog, is that it's almost like, it's especially for folks who have diabetes, because they have these underlying chronic conditions, they are highly at risk for getting brain fog. It's almost like there's kindling just waiting to spark into a flame. It doesn't take much to set it off.
I love how you say that, because that's when we think about that term, that word, inflammation, that is the flame right in the center of it. Okay, so and here's the other thing that she said, in case folks kind of missed it. If you missed it, well, I want you to be very aware of this, that inflammation is the body's way of responding to an irritant or something that doesn't belong there. So in a way, our inflammation is the good thing because it's a signaling. The problem comes in when it's a bad thing, when inflammation causes all other problems because it's not tended to, because we have this challenge and we're not addressing it. So it could be type 2 diabetes. Low-grade inflammation leads to high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and a host of other problems. And brain fog and lack of focus can be one of them. So we are so happy to have this incredible young lady with us today. Talk to us a little bit more about the forgetting. Are you saying that we should not have senior moments?
No, not at all. I think that that's just part of development. And a lot of people actually, especially because there is increased awareness around Alzheimer's and dementia, a lot of people, once they reach a certain age, over, like, say, around 40, they start to be concerned because they realize, oh, I'm not remembering like I used to. There's a difference between kind of these senior moments, these kind of lapses in memory. That's part of a maturing system that's changing. We always change, and it just becomes more apparent as we get older. Some of the executive functions So working memory is the executive function that I've been studying as a researcher, right? And working memory is what allows us to hold on to information and do or think about something else at the same time. So we use working memory whenever we're doing multi-step things, like following a recipe, driving a car, even emptying the garbage, right? So if it's not habitual, if it's not instinctual, we're using working memory, right? We're even using working memory when we pay the bills, when we're reading and trying to comprehend what we're reading, right? You're using working memory right now to integrate what I'm saying with what you already know, right? So, but working memory, as well as two other executive functions, as we get older, those gates that allow us to be focused, that allow us to shift what we're thinking from here or to there, that allow us to kind of do some of that mental juggling, those gates kind of weaken. And so they let information in when maybe they shouldn't have let information in, and maybe they stay stuck and closed when they should have opened, right? And so these kinds of changes happen. If you don't realize it though, you all of a sudden are like, oh my gosh, I don't remember where I parked the car. You get worried, you think something's really wrong. Some of that though might just be part of aging. If it's compounded with other issues, right? Then we have to start to think about, whoa, is there something more going on beyond typical aging?
Okay, so you kind of just mentioned some of those other issues before, but kind of bring those things into focus for your average Joe.
Which things?
So, what other things might be when we combine that with the
Yeah,
brain fog can be indicative of a more serious problem?
gotcha. So yeah, it's really funny because working memory problems can show up for both people who have brain fog and pre-dementia. So those kinds of lapses where you are having a hard time, you might remember the first thing in a step and the last thing, and maybe you forgot everything in between. Or you might forget to have locked the front door to your house when you left because your mind was scattered and elsewhere. Those kinds of things can happen for both. But what we see is different for folks who are on the path towards dementia, is that there are long-term memory implications. So they start to forget things that are personally relevant to them, right? So they might start to forget how to get home if they were at the grocery store. So in both cases, whether you have brain fog or if you're having more serious dementia issues, you might forget where you parked your car after you went grocery shopping, right? But for a person who's having more serious cognitive decline, they're going to forget how to get back home, or maybe how to get the car in motion, things that they would ordinarily know that are like stored in their long-term memory. Those things are going to change. Their behavior also might change because with dementia, there's more structural problems. So if we think about brain fog, if we think about brain circuitry, anytime we're thinking, right, that it's like wires and circuits, right? There's electrical signals traveling. With brain fog, the actual flow is what's disrupted. The chemical and the electrical signal flow is disrupted. And that's why all of a sudden we're like, oh, well, what did I just say a moment ago? Right? But with more serious cognitive issues, it's not just the flow that's disrupted. You start to have deterioration in the wiring, in the insulation that helps to keep the flow efficient. And so when you start to have those more structural problems, if you can imagine a wire where the insulation is leaking, right? Some of the signals, the wires are getting crossed, so to speak. And this is why we see we see poor judgment, whereas maybe someone was really good making judgments about how to spend their money or what to do with their free time. Someone who's headed more towards a path of dementia, we're going to start to see more serious changes in the way that they function. Brain fog, there's no magic bullet to fix it, but like you said earlier, when you understand the cause of really that inflammation, then you can start to take steps to calm it down and to get your thinking back. It's much more temporary. The reason why it seems to persist with folks is a lot of times they don't know how to target the patterns, to pinpoint, this is what instigates it for me. And so, if you keep aiming for the wrong thing, it's not going to improve.
So tell us a little bit about your resilient framework and how this helps your clients to take back their cognitive abilities.
Yeah. Well, so when I coach folks at the very basic, we look at their brain healthy habits and kind of see how is the way that they're functioning, their lifestyle choices influencing the way that they think, whether it's in the way that they're moving and the way that they're restoring themselves, and if they are even restoring themselves, so their exercise, their water, their eating habits, basic things. But then we also look at resilient factors. So resilience, the RES, stands for how we respond and resource ourselves. And that is often an area where folks don't really know, especially in our American culture, don't really know what's needed, because our brain is using, it's almost like our smartphones, right? Even if we're not using an app, there's things running in the background. And when we don't swipe those apps off, we're draining the battery. Well, our brain works the same way. We have lots of things running in the background out of our awareness. And if we don't give it time to restore itself, then we're just depleting its energy, right? And so we have to learn how to restore and respond, especially to the signals that our body is sending us. Then the I stands for insight, gaining insight into your own personal brain wiring ways. And, there's definitely researchers come up with some commonalities, typical ways that we should expect things to happen. But we want to dig into what's unique for you, right? And what things, everything can be a blessing or, a curse. It's really in how we harness it. So really getting an understanding about that. And then the lie is the lie, and the T stands for truth. So when we do some deeper coaching, we get at what are the lies and the truths about your situation? What are the stories that you're telling yourself that either are keeping you from doing what would work well for you, or that are holding you back in some other way? And the N is for navigation. It's learning how to navigate life better, whether that means developing some self-advocacy. So if you're someone who's having forgetting problems, right? And it's something that can't be changed. Let's say, for example, it's a medication that you have to have, but it has a side effect of forgetting, right? And so there's not a choice to have a different medication. Well, then how can you learn to advocate for your memory needs in a different way and not see that as a problem, but as a basic need, like brushing your teeth, like wearing your glasses, wearing shoes outside? How can you start to develop the skills to navigate differently? And in some cases, it's figuring out supports that can help you be at your best, no matter how your brain is functioning. A lot of people think, oh, I just need this magic pill to fix this or that. I believe that in most cases, we have what we need to make our lives better already in us. Sometimes we just need help shining a light on those things, or we need some enhancement of our knowledge so that we can say, oh, I never knew that taking brain breaks would actually relieve how my brain is functioning. I never knew that using a big old school monthly calendar would make such a difference in my life. And that is actually a tip that most folks don't even realize. If you're having cognitive issues, one of the first things I recommend to folks is to use one of those old school big monthly calendars, because if you're having difficulty remembering what happened last week, it's also probably going to be hard for you to remember what you want to do in 3 days from now and keeping up with what's happening today. So what it does is it offloads everything that's in here. And so instead of having to rely on something that's being unreliable for you, you can quickly access the information and feel more coherent. And you'd be amazed how many people are like, I didn't realize how much better something as simple as a paper calendar was going to be. And big one, because you need a certain amount of visual space to make it easier to process. A lot of people don't realize how something as simple as that can make a difference.
I'm going to ask this one question and sort of circle back
Yeah.
to something that you said a little while ago, because everyone has underlying thought processes. Everyone has the little voice in their head. Even those people that say, there are no voices in my head, that was the voice in your head that said that. Okay.
Right?
Just to let you know, the voice that said what voice, when I talk about the voice, that's the voice that's in your head, folks. So how do we help individuals to work with that, becoming aware of their of the underpinning programming that's running through them, that's kind of driving them? How do we help them to become aware of that and then move forward from that to become cognizant and meta aware so that they can function?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different ways that folks achieve this. And for me and the clients that I work with, it's easiest to be very explicit. And so one of the things is kind of helping them start to listen to themselves, right? And hear, because you can often hear what's important to them, that what's important for them to see reflected in themselves, and what's important for them to reflect out to others. And so you can often hear, like, for example, if somebody, I'll be more concrete, if somebody's like, oh my gosh, I had to work 60 hours this week. I mean, that right there, it may seem like a simple statement, but it's behind it. There's a belief, because they chose the word I had to work. There's a belief, something drove them to believe that they actually had to work that amount of time. And usually there's some kind of underlying ideas about what it means to achieve, or maybe they didn't feel like a smaller amount of effort was good enough. And so when you can start to identify the patterns in their own language, what's the meaning behind what you just said? Why is this so important? Then you can start to unpack, and you can have people track, for example, how often do I tell myself this? Right? And so there's different ways for people to track their own thoughts, but really being able to look at in writing, oh, wow, I say this to myself 5 times a day. Okay, well, so now we understand the pattern. This is a recurring pattern. What can we actually do? How can we tell a different story to ourselves? And some of that has to do with reframing what the original idea was, that's kind of keeping things that way. And some of it is a matter of unpacking it and helping them, because once we have a belief, it's going to filter how we see the rest of the world. And so what ends up happening is we repeat that pattern and we strengthen it. So then we strengthen those brain networks that say, this is the way the world works for me, right? So if I believe I'm so different than everybody else, nobody understands me, I'm not saying that's not true. What I'm saying is that kind of belief, if it's holding you back, if it's preventing you from doing things, if it's keeping you from joining things that make you feel belonging, that make you feel enriched in life, then we need to figure out what is the evidence for you being so different, and what can we do to expand that perspective so that way you can understand that you may be different, but those differences are appreciated. Maybe not where you've been, but maybe there's other places to explore. And so it starts to shift, the way that folks see what they think is the truth, right? Instead of it being a bad thing, it can be just a thing, or it can be something to celebrate.
Of course, so many people have these beliefs. And when I work with my clients, one of the things I do is with the crush method is the C, meaning to conceive and to commit. Well, the conception part, the conceiving part, does involve that mindfulness and what's coming up for them. What are they really saying in their minds? What are they really saying in their hearts? And then writing that down, committing it to text, and then challenging those beliefs. why is it you believe you can't find a good husband or a good wife? Why is it you believe that you are no good? Or in many cases, our clients are trying to lose weight, and you're saying, why is it you believe that your life has to be the way it is? What is it? What would it look like for you if things were different for yourself, for your family, for your friends? Okay, well, I might not have any friends, so let's address that.
Right.
So many times we fear to do things, and we don't know why we fear it until we sit back and look at our underlying messages to ourselves. You see,
Yeah.
so I really value what you're saying and how things are brought out. We're not going to jump into the whole Jungian archetype thing just yet, but there's a lot to be said about that. Besides, my clients will be saying, "Man, what you talking about?" So we're not going to get into that. But now, when it comes to, we talked a little bit about diet and things like that. So, you are the master or mistress of the mind diet. Can you tell us what it's about and help us to understand its effectiveness and how it's applied? Tell us about the mind diet. And is this an acronym?
Yes, it is. I'm so thrilled part of the reason I wanted to talk with you and your community about this is that it's kind of this not secret. Because it's in the research world and it's not this product that you can go buy, a lot of people don't know about it. And so I want to raise awareness around this because Dr. Martha Claire Morris did some amazing work and her colleagues. So back in 2015, they published their first article on this, but what they had done was they had studied folks ranging in age from, I think, like 58 to 98. They were part of this aging project. They studied them for 9 years. And part of that project, they had to keep a food journal. Well, so what Dr. Morris and her colleagues did was create this mind diet framework, and mind stands for the Mediterranean and dash. So there's the M, intervention, I, for neurodegenerative, N, delay, D. So what they did is they took what was known already in research to be really powerful foods for supporting the body based on the Mediterranean and dash. And she said, well, of those foods, which of those could really support brain functioning? Could it reduce cognitive decline? Could it prevent Alzheimer's? This is what she was wanting to see. Could a mixture of foods do that? And what she found was yes, that when the mind diet is really a framework. So I want to be clear about that. It's not a diet like, oh, you need to eat a half a cup of carrots today and, so much whole grains tomorrow. It's really on a weekly basis. And that's because in the study, they analyzed the eating journals of the folks who followed this framework. And what they found was that the folks who kept with this, who ate the 10 brain healthy food groups and stayed away from the 5 unhealthy food groups, they had a 53% reduction in the likelihood that they would get Alzheimer's. Because of course, some people in their sample, they got Alzheimer's, but the folks who followed the mind diet had a 53% less likelihood that they were going to have it. And the exciting thing is, for those people who aren't good about like sticking exactly to something, even the people who followed it moderately found they were 35% less likely to get Alzheimer's. So you don't have to stick to it, to the exact. It's very flexible. And this is why I want people to know about it, because the foods, it's not any huge mystery. What is the mystery is, well, how much of these do we need to eat across a week, right? And so, for example, the 10 healthy foods are things like whole grains, vegetables, leafy greens, nuts, berries, fish, poultry, red wine, olive oil, right? And also limiting red meat, butter, margarine, cheese, fried foods, sweets. And so what it does is it sets these benchmarks. It says, in a week, ideally, we recommend you eat this many leafy greens, this many whole grains, right? And so it's a way for you to monitor how you're eating and to know that, okay, well, if I actually eat the 6 leafy greens across a week, I know I'm doing my brain good. I know I'm doing my body good.
Okay. Well, now I've got to ask this question, because a lot of my clients know that I got to get my caveman on. Okay, I've got to get my caveman on sometimes. So here's the thing: there are people like Dave Asprey. I don't know if you've heard of him, and there are other individuals out there in the wellness and longevity community that moved more towards a carnivore diet, and they're finding a lot of positive effects from that. So what's the balance there? And then on top of that, the food chain, or the not food chain, but the food pyramid.
Yeah.
Okay, they're finding out now that the food pyramid is what has really been at the source of the inflammation, obesity state that we're in now. So now, when we consider that, okay, is it possible that the mind diet is something that can be adjusted so that we focus more on the meats and the healthy fats, staying away from the fried stuff, but moving away from the processed, ultra processed, standard American diet that's really got people inflamed. Can you do that? And now, if that's the case, what are the 5 foods to eat weekly that can help us to reduce or reverse cognitive decline?
Yeah, well, so it's about the combination of those foods, right? And so, for example, it's like eating 2 servings of nuts a week, berries. It's, the fish, I think it's only 1 serving of fish a week. Now, if you don't eat fish at all, does that mean you're not going to reap benefits from following this framework? Absolutely not. Because of the way that the food diet came about, right? We know that there doesn't need to be strict adherence in order to benefit from it. And so folks who want to eat red meat, the mind diet doesn't stipulate that you can't have any red meat. You just want to have, I think it's less than 5 a week, or is it less than 4? One of the two. That's doable for many people, right? And so it's a matter of eating the right foods in combination with reducing the harmful foods, right? And making sure that you're getting diverse. So for example, with the leafy greens, it's not recommended that you just have salad a week. No, you can have spinach. You can throw that in a soup. You can have collard greens. You can have cabbage. And so in my foods tracker, that's one of the things I try to do is list what are some really common foods, so you can very quickly take a look at how you're eating and say, oh, I'm a little short this week so far on this. If I add some carrots to this, then I'm going to be much closer to the recommendations for this week, right? And so I do think it's something very flexible that you can incorporate to how you eat. And that, to me, that's why I created the tracker, because there are really good recipe books and meal planning books out there that you can buy. But one of the things that can happen when you're looking at those books is you might feel like, oh, I need to adopt this really special way of eating. And I would like to see people instead say, oh, these are really good, generally good practices for my cognition and will be preventative down the road. And as much as I can stick to it, I'm doing myself good.
Nice. So that's the incredible thing to understand, that your eating lifestyle. Like, she keeps saying mind diet, and everyone that knows me and comes to the show knows I don't like that word diet too much.
I don't like it either.
The only reason why is, if you take off the T, what word do you have?
Die.
Yeah, so I kind of want to avoid doing that. But that said, eating lifestyle and incorporating the mind diet certainly has its merits, and it's a flexible thing. So it's something that we can work with. Now, that said, we have the idea is to have a lifestyle change, and it involves your change of mind, your change of action, your change of heart. because that brings things totally to focus, you see? And when you do that, you wind up with beautiful people on your screen, like Leilani here. Okay, I think what we'll do is maybe in another episode, we're just gonna come on and create and just make her first name a mantra that we'll just say throughout the entire program, just Leilani. But you're such a delight to talk to, and you bring such insight, you see. And so there's so many things that are involved in your practice that we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg on. Yeah. But that said, I wanted to ask you this one last question that I ask all of my guests. Leilani Sáez, what does it mean to you to crush your mountain?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for, but I believe that all things can teach us. And so for me, the mountain is there for a reason, right? It's a challenge, it's a potential struggle that was there for me to learn from, a lesson to learn from. And so for me, I don't want to crush my mountain in a way that just like obliterates it. For me, crushing the mountain would be figuring out a way to create a tunnel through it, right? Because I know that when I come out on the other side, I can look behind me and be reminded of the lessons I learned, the growth I made, and I want that still there behind me in case I ever need to remind myself what that was all about. But so that's why I want that tunnel there, but I own that mountain, so to speak. So, crushing to me sounds like it's going to be something really, and I want that mountain still to be there as a reminder of all how I've grown, how I'm wiser.
Wow. Friends, let me explain what she just said. First of all, if you think about John Henry, the legendary steel driving man, he took his hammer and put it to the bottom of the mountain, and he created that tunnel on the other side. And that's what it's about. So we're on sync. But here's the motto that I want to bring to you with this one, okay? Because this lady has brought in some powerful points. Make your mountain your monument, because that's the whole idea. I deal with adversity, you deal with adversity every single day. Our health, and many times the health issues in particular, is the biggest mountain adversity that we will ever face in many cases. When we're faced with that, don't just climb it in order to deal with it and take the medicines that they tell you to take with the side effects that will only result in more medication to counteract the side effects that only result in more medicine. No, you take your action, take the steps, take medicine to your own hands, grab your hammer, and then you can do what we just talked about, because there's going to be an end to that tunnel. There's going to be a light at the end. And the bottom line is, you'll be able to look back, as Leilani said, and you'll be able to see the monument that you have made of your mountain. And we want to thank Dr. Leilani Sáez so very much for being here with us today. She's an incredible lady. There's this wonderful thing when you have super intelligence, a great sense of humor, and a beautiful smile to go with it. We are just basking today, folks. So thank you again, Leilani. And as I mentioned to everyone at this time, and I always tell you this, and I'll say it again, and I'll see you next week. But until then, don't just climb your mountain, crush through it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so very much, Leilani.
Thank you, Henry. I had fun.